Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. Before we get into tonight's lecture, I want to do a little shameless promotion. Tomorrow, Mars's very own Tom Rand, the practice leader for our clean tech practice, is going to be launching his book, Kick the Fossil Fuel Habit. It's here in the auditorium at 6 p.m. and you're all welcome to attend. Tom is both an advisor here but an entrepreneur investing in clean tech opportunities, and he's a very entertaining speaker, and I think this will, if you're interested in clean tech at all, I think this will be a great event. So, enough for the promotion. Tonight, it's a colleague of mine, Krista Jones, that I'm delighted to have here tonight. Krista is our practice lead in ICT. She has, prior to Mars, had executive positions involving operations, engineering. She has a bachelor's degree in engineering from University of New Brunswick. Marketing, biz dev for companies like Nortel, MTS Allstream, which was formerly AT&T Can, Metronet. It says here the most successful startup, CLEC, which is a competitive local exchange carrier in Canada, and Personeta, if I'm pronouncing that right, which was an Israel-based VC-backed software startup. Now it's interesting, as she and her husband also own a children's technology educational franchise, fostering early innovation and creativity in robotics, animation, digital art, and video game design. So she may well be responsible for why my son spends hours in front of his game system. Krista's talking tonight about enterprise sales. And the reason she's doing so is an example of her sales skills, because she came to me early in this year, having seen the lineup for the lectures, and said, "You don't have a lecture about sales, stupid." Well, it was implicit. Because there's the old saw that nothing happens until somebody sells something. So she was absolutely right. We had marketing lectures and all the other stuff, but I'd forgotten to say, yeah, you need to know how to sell something. So she sold me on the idea. And of course, what she got was, fine, you can give the lecture. She's very cleverly, and this is that innovation coming in, managed to rope in a whole bunch of other people. I think you're going to find this both educational and quite entertaining. So without further ado, Krista, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. All right, I'm going to try to get myself set here to make sure. Just let me do a quick check in the audience. This is truly enterprise selling, and I just want to get a feel for what industries people are coming from. How many people here in the life sciences industry? How many people in ICT? Clean tech? So this is going to be really, this is really truly a B2B or an enterprise selling presentation. The skills that are required for partnership selling and for different types of relationships are a whole other area that is not going to be addressed. I'm also not addressing consumer sales. One of the things that's really important to realize is that sales is a whole industry onto its own. It's a professional designation. It's something that is not to be taken lightly. And one of the things that is really important is in any startup, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, your business doesn't start until you sell something. whether you've sold a license as a drug development company or whether you've sold your first customer, even if it's a trial customer that's not paying. So I actually believe, and I know that our panelists would agree with me that are going to be coming up later, that without sales, you actually don't have a business. It doesn't matter how good your technology is. Because believe it or not, the best product does not always win. It's actually the best sales company that does. One of the things that and I don't know if any of you have seen the tree swing cartoons. These have been in many different forms that I've seen over the years with, what engineering made, what sales sold. And I think these two are really quite fascinating because they're focusing on the most important thing in sales. It's really about what the customer wants. It's really not about overselling him on the simplicity because you could probably miss the deal if you do that. So that's why this is a very important comic strip that I like to start with. And one of the things that's important to realize is the only way you get to know that is by entering into a series of conversations with your customer. And those conversations can be had in many different formats, but it is really important because if you're going in and sending them a Cadillac and really all they want and can afford is a I'm trying to think of, you can tell I'm not a car person, so I probably shouldn't have used that analogy, but all you want is a Volkswagen Bug and you're trying to sell them a Cadillac, you're totally not going to make the sale. So it is really important to actually make sure that you match it to them. Oh, I guess the big green one goes forward. There we go. One of the other things as I started out the presentation that I think is really important, and I'm sorry, I'm going to move this back because I'm not a stationary person. Everybody really needs to remember that sales is a process. It's a whole activity that your company undergoes. Everybody spends a lot of time on product development and software development and agile development and figuring out how you get that done and do it right and what your customer service process is. You've got to remember that sales is a process. And because it is a process, you need to create the process for your company. You need to manage the process. You need to staff it. You need to report on it. You need to innovate within it as you talk to your clients and what you need to do. And you need to really attack it in a professional manner. One of the things that I think most people should have been at the marketing sessions that were held before Christmas. When we talk about sales targeting, and you see on here, sales targets is the second point, this is not saying that this is my customer segment, this is not having established customer personas, this is taking it to a whole other level of specificity that's required. That is part of your marketing exercise. Part of your sales exercise is now getting down to names of companies, because you know what they're doing homework on each individual one, and really getting intimate with those individual sales. So really sales is a very intimate, very detailed process that's customer by customer, whereas marketing is more general and dealt with in the broader sense that you then sell within. So I think it's really important to remember that. And one of the things that, that most people miss is the fact that in sales, there are really dedicated and specific resources and skills that are required. So if you start to look at the sales, the skills that are required for sales, most entrepreneurial companies, they have the red skills. They're usually self-starters, they're motivated, they're used to doing everything and anything that they can. And they have part of the blue skills in terms of they usually have a deep product or a deep industry expertise or something that they need to know. But one of the things that's really important is to be a good salesperson, you need to know more than your industry because you need to know how to move a conversation along. How many people here know a born salesman? Somebody that could sell you anything, convince you to do anything, right? I know I'm not that person, right? I'm the great expert that will help a salesperson and be that detailed one. When I was in a sales role, I found that side of it was something that I really had to work at, that networking and that knowing how to push the conversation forward. And I got really good, and a lot of my colleagues here at Mars will know that I like to end every meeting with actions. What's the next step? Now that came from my sales training because you need to know how to go to your next stage and to move them forward. One of the things that's also really important is one of the things that customers need to feel is they need to feel a connection with the salesperson. And that comes to having those very, very specific skills in terms of being able to ask probing questions and being able to really relate to them on their level and having done your homework. So it is really important that sales is not something in your company that is done part-time by the founder or somebody else just as you're trying to fill it in. Sure, you might start there, but you're really not going to be successful until you actually acknowledge that these are skills and try to find some. One of the next things that's really important is your sales channel. And enterprise sales, like I said, is a whole large industry unto its own. And so is how you can sell. I mean, I could spend the next hour just talking in detail about each one of these sales channels and not have covered them with enough depth. So these are things that you need to be aware of. Now, the thing that is really important is that you can choose your sales channel fairly simplistically in terms of how you want to begin. And let's not confuse your ultimate goal with the first few sales. Your first few sales will absolutely definitely be face-to-face. It will be people that you've talked to. If you're a really good entrepreneurial team, you will have been talking to customers all along, so that when you finally have a product that's ready, you can move into sales mode with a few of them, and you've developed that relationship with them, because at that point, they're going to be willing to buy from you. So your first customers will probably always be done that way. But if you know that your long-term goal is that you need to go indirect because that's what the economics of your business state, or that's how your customers want to be reached, which is the most important piece. Because customers, they don't have time to meet with everybody on every product that they have. They already have established connections and relationships and people they trust. And so for different types of products, they want you to interact with them in different ways. And you really need to listen to what they're saying and where they do their purchasing today. So if you look at this, it's really an important, as you go from an increasing complexity of transaction and you go up on the vertical side in terms of the size of the account or the size of the customer you're dealing with, you get into a much more complex sales cycle. So if you start at the very basic in terms of you're selling in small amounts to small companies, a fairly simple product, you're going to do it retail, you're going to go through stores, you're going to do it online. In terms of that's how you're going to get the sales going forward. But as you move forward, so if you go to increasing complexity of transaction, but you go into small accounts, there's a reason why SMBs are the most underserved market out there. It's because they're expensive to reach. And there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time trying to create the channel market to get into that marketplace, and you need to take advantage of it. Because if not, the economics of your business are going to be really difficult. When you go up the size in terms of accounts, there's companies that will be spending a significant amount of money with you, and those are ones you need to manage closer, and you need to have a more intimate relationship with them. And because they're spending a lot of money, they want to connect with you. For them, it's a significant amount of money for their business, and they need that personal connection. Now, you need to decide, based on the complexity of the product that you're selling, whether it's something that can be done over the telephone, that's what inside sales means, whether it's something that needs to be done direct, face-to-face by an account person that can carry a variety of products and can be sold to, or you need to decide that what you have is a complex solution that requires personal ROI, returns on investment, or value propositions to them, and you need to create what we call a solution selling group. That's rarely one person. It's usually an account manager supported by some technical folks and supported by some customer service people. So this chart is something where you need to spend quite a bit of time really understanding how your client wants you to reach them and what makes more. Because if you're calling the CEO of a big company and you're trying to sell him a product that is fairly simple, that is probably purchased out of the purchasing department, you're wasting your time. You're not going to get a call back. But if you go to the right person and you go in through the right channels, you'll get that sale made. I wanted to expand a little bit on indirect channels because this is an area where at Mars we get a lot of questions on. So one of the things that's really important is that there are 5 different types of channels that you can team up with. And each one of them have strengths and weaknesses. And it's not like you could only choose one. You will probably use multiple of these in your business if you choose to go the indirect channel route, and you'll use them for different manners. So it's all about Where is the logical intersection point for the customer with your product? So a great example, I come out of the telecom industry, but please don't hold that against me. And one of the things that exists in that industry is a large amount of resellers that do the solutions and put the pieces together. So if you have a company who already has a reseller that they outsource all of their communication means to, well, it makes sense for you to get them selling your product to that customer rather than you having to go in and try to talk to them. Odds are they're not going to talk to you. They're going to tell you, this is who I buy my telecom from. Please go see them. So it's that sort of an example that I think you really need to think through. And you need to think about them as there's companies out there that sell similar technologies that might already be established at, or I'm not going to say similar, but complementary. So things that your product attaches to and works with. And if they already have a relationship, then you don't have to set that relationship. You can go into the service partner, which is a person that's going to do the operations and maintenance if you decide not to do that in your business for your technology. There's channel partners, which is a lot of the marketing agencies. If you're selling into lawyers, you can go through the lawyer associations. If you're selling into accountants, you can go to the small business associations in town, the boards of trade, and there's different ways that you can use channel partners to get in. So that's one of the things that you need to look at, and once again, and that's why it's a bigger part of this discussion, is the customer is the middle point. Now, one of the things that everybody always thinks is, oh, if I could just get IBM to sell my product. Yes, that would be great. The problem is, the path to get IBM to sell your product is probably longer than the cash runway that you have. So that's why my comment is that big is not always best. Sure, you'll continue to foster that relationship, but it's really important to find channels who your product is important to them, and it makes it different to them, and that there's a value proposition for that channel partner. They might be competing against the IBM, and your product gives them, or your service, or your offering, gives them an added feature that is going to allow them to win more business, or is going to allow them to go back in and increase the business with the existing clients that they have. Those are really important considerations for you to look at. I've had numerous clients that I've worked with over the past while that they have great sessions with some of the big consulting firms. Their software for IT, they're getting it, their thoughts is to get it resold, and they're 18 months in, and they're still in the tech department doing analysis, and they've never met a salesperson. If you're not talking to the salesperson, you're not being sold to the company, to the customers that you need to get to. If you're still in the lab, if you're still inside the tech department at the partner and it's 12 months in, I would suggest moving your attention to other ones where you quickly can get your value proposition out to their customers through their salespeople. One of the things that is back to my original point about their sales as a process. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about a sales funnel. The most important thing about a sales funnel is if you're running a business, you have to have one. And you have to manage it, and you have to look at it weekly. So this is really an important tool. And what I've got down the middle of it is prospects, validated prospects, qualified, best few, won, and then the post-management. And basically the message is that at every stage you have a 10% success rate to move on to the next stage. And so that if you want to have one customer, you have to start with 10 prospects. So if you're building a business plan and you're going to say in 2010, you're going to have 20 customers and you have about a 4-month sales cycle, well, do the math in terms of figuring out that you probably need about 200 prospects in the top of your funnel that you're managing to take them through. Because you're not going to get to the end of where you need to go, and you're not going to achieve that. And that's one of the first calculations that anybody doing a due diligence on your business, whether it's a customer or whether it's an investor or whatever, is going to do those quick calculations and say, all right, you're talking to 10 customers and you think you're going to sign 7. Either you have one kick-ass product that is, everybody's talking about the pain that they have in their business because they don't have that product yet, or you have a kick-ass salesperson. So you better be able to demonstrate one or the other in terms of what it is. I think it's really important is everybody talks about success rates being 1 in 10. For a startup, 1 in 25. It's really, in your first couple of years, it's a lot worse than 1 in 10. And so that's what's really important, is that you should be talking to people all the time. When I talk about dedicated resources, it's really hard to be talking to enough prospects if in the second half of your day you're doing the product development, and the next half of the day you're doing your investment, and then the next part of the day. So it is a really important task. And I think I mentioned briefly that the length of time it takes to go down that funnel depends upon the complexity of your sale and the amount that the contract is going to be worth. So if you're trying to sell somebody something that is over in the 6 digits, a $100,000 sale, it's going to take you a lot longer, probably in the 8 to 10 months range, maybe even a year. You probably have to get into a buy-in cycle with them. If you're selling them something that's kind of within their discretionary sell of their budget, it'll take you less time to get through that. So you really have to analyze that. I'm not going to go through this in detail. The main message on this sales funnel aids is that you need different things at different stages. And one of the common mistakes I see being made is people doing custom proposals at the prospect stage. That's a lot of time and energy on your behalf. If you've done your marketing right and you have your reference solutions and you have some reference kind of presentations that you can use, that's what you need to be doing at the prospect stage. You need to make sure that it's worth your time and energy to get into the custom proposal and the custom pricing. You got to give yourself some time to get through the process with them. I'm not talking a lot about online selling, and a lot of you will have online models, especially as we do a lot of software as a service, and you start to get into, a lot of people are coming up with some really great ideas to service the SMB community out there. The important thing is that you have the same odds. Your tactics and what you measure are just very different. But if you look at these numbers, and this is an example that I've pulled out, the numbers are about 1 in 10. They just look at it different. It's all about how you present your information. Marketing is incredibly important here as opposed to the face-to-face sales. So this is a really important aspect to it. The next thing is that if you have a product that is in the strategic selling, remember my chart up front where you look at what you're doing and you've got something that's high in value and complex in nature, means you're probably selling to a larger company that can afford that. And as such, you have very different buyers. And this is why managing your process is so important. You will need to find out who all these people are in the company, and you will need to sell to all of them. You can't rely on any one, except for the coach really to help you. So there's user buyers, there's economic buyers, and there's technical buyers. You need to figure out a way to create a win-win with each. You need to actually and honestly rank how you think they feel about you. And what's really important about this is you can usually tell. And if you don't know, you can ask somebody. It's amazing when you ask somebody what they will tell you. And the other one is you really need to figure out a way to overcome each of these. To make sure that you get because oftentimes the economic buyer, you might get, the guy that's holding the budget to say yes, but it's not going to help if you've done usage-based pricing and not a user out there uses it. So that's really not going to benefit you if that's the case in terms of what you've done. Because to the economic buyer, that's fine for them. They've agreed, they're not spending any money unless you get the user to do it, right? And it's also important to remember your technical buyers. One of the real challenges is that value proposition is everything. And understand that the value proposition isn't related to you. It's how it's related to your customer. So this is a quote by some Stanley Works consultants and Stanley Works sold drills. And they were having trouble making their sales, and this consultant came back and said, you need to rethink what you're doing. You're not in the business of selling drills, you're in the business of selling holes. Because if they don't need holes, they don't need drills. And so this is really a kind of an exaggerated way of saying, sell a benefit, sell the outcome, sell the value in the customer's terms, not in your terms. And if you just remember that, and remember that in every conversation you have, it really doesn't matter how many features you have, because if they only need one and you don't have it, and you can't convince them that you're solving a problem for them with the features that you have, they're not going to buy it. I'm quickly coming to the end here, and I'm going to quickly go through these next few slides. The sales pitch is really important. this is where it comes into the mechanics of it. You really have to be clear on what you're doing. Do not run into a sales meeting, not pull out a slide or a deck that you have for general purpose, not be on time, not know who's going to be in the meeting, not have done any of your homework ahead of time, not know what you want out of the meeting and expect it to be successful. Because it's not going to be. Because they've given them your time and you need to be respectful of that. Because they're running their business. Just like you're running yours, they're running theirs. And you need to make sure that the time that they're spent on your meeting with you gives them some value into their business. The other thing that's up there is your deck is not your script. It's not your script. You don't have to follow it exactly. But do remember that it is your guide, that you need to use it to help make sure you don't forget anything important. Winging it in a sales meeting guarantees that you're going to leave there thinking, oh, if I had just said that. The other thing that I think is really important is the structure of deals. This can get very, very confusing for people as they go through. So I kind of broke deals into, and what you need to decide on deals into two areas. The bottom one is something that Charles said one of the advisors was using, which I really liked, is you're going to treat clients differently as you move through your business growth. Your first clients, you're going to sell them and they're going to be for reference. The next set of clients that you get after you have your reference clients are going to be for revenue. So you might sell them at a lesser margin. You might give them a discount to get them on board. You get your revenue up, the number of customers you need. And then you're going to go into the margin mode in terms of selling them on your margin and what you need to do and how you sell and how you price. So that's where you might start going off list and doing things differently. So you got to remember to deal. Reference customers come first, revenue customers come second, margin customers come third. And you have to plan your business accordingly. Deals can have many different ways, and you can do them in any one of these stages where you can have partnership deals, you can have licensing deals, you can have really simple deals. It could be try it for free for 6 months. It could be a pilot. Anything you need to get the end result that you want. You could do a lot for free for a reference customer if at the end of the day, and free from an economic value, but at the end of the day, what they're going to give you is a reference customer and they're willing to take calls from your next clients to actually go and tell them how great your product is. So you got to remember that this is a complicated thing that you need to do, and don't get yourself stuck on what you do going in, and don't leave too much up front in terms of what you're trying to do. The next thing is remember that sales is a people process. Do not hide behind email, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, any of those social media tools. Get out of your office, get out of your home, go to their site, meet with them. Especially for a startup. Nobody ever got fired from buying from IBM. A lot of people have gotten fired from buying from startups. But when you can develop that relationship and that have that confidence in you that you're going to make it work for them and that they know that you've got the business under control and that you can handle things, they're going to be willing to take that chance with you. So it's a really important thing to remember is it's a people process. You need to go there and meet them. And if that's not your forte, hire somebody to do it. Get a partner to do it. Remember the 10-3-1 rule. And this is really important. For every 10 calls you make, if you're good, you'll get to make 3 presentations. And with those 3 presentations, if you're good, you'll probably get 1 sale out of them. Sales is one of the industries where people face the most rejection of any other industry, and they still smile. That's what makes a good salesperson, because it's not personal. The rejection is usually logical business sense. It's done with respect and all that kind of stuff in terms of what you need to do. So it is an important one. And this is my last note before we go into the next part of this, is listen to the customer. I really believe this, and it was funny. I was sitting somewhere just earlier this week when somebody reminded me of this quote. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should always use them in that proportion, especially when you're dealing with your customer. Listen to them. Ask them questions, and then let them answer. Ask them questions. Again, let them speak. I view a successful sales presentation as when I've spoken a third of the time and they've spoken 2/3 of the time, and they're starting to give me ideas as how the product can be used, what they're going to do with it. They're starting to talk about the people that they want to get involved. That's really great. Sure, they might not have understood every technical piece, but you know what? You're getting the next meeting. If they're sitting there really quiet and looking at their BlackBerry because you keep wanting to get the next slide up about your feature or the next great thing about it, you ain't getting the next meeting. So it's really important to remember this. So what we're going to do now, and I'm hoping that this is entertaining, is I'm going to bring up a couple of successful salespeople who are friends of Mars, and then I'm going to bring up a couple of my associates, and we're going to have a couple of skits. We're going to do 3 skits. So we're going to do a skit that has a particular positioning for a sales call, and then the panel is going to provide some commentary as to what was good, what was bad, and stuff inside that inside the sales call. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. The first one is Charles Plant. He is an unreformed entrepreneur, having acted as a CEO or CFO of several successful startup companies. He's been in the communications field. He's done many different things: management consultant, investment banker, auditor, and now at Mars, he leads our business mentorship and entrepreneurship program. He's also on faculty at York University Schulich. No, I can't say that, can I? Schulich? Okay, that's not meant for my Quebec mouth. And is a chartered accountant with an MBA in marketing. So welcome, Charles. Thank you. Harvey Coleman is one of our volunteer advisors here at Mars, and he has about 40 years experience in the IT industry. And I think he's done just about everything in terms of the roles that you can make. He's headed pre-sales support for banking systems, marketing strategies for the Olivetti Group. He spent 10 years as the managing director for Acorn. He's been in the UK. He's been the president of Dell Canada. I could keep going on. One of the most important things to remember is, from a sales process perspective, I think Harvey has a lot of great advice in terms of how to keep things on track and move things through the process. The next 2 people I'm going to introduce are 2 of the associates in the ICT practice, Seema Khani and Charles Lim, who are going to be our actors. So join me in thanking them for doing this. All right, so guys, are you ready for skit number 1?
So, thank you for having me, Seema, and my company. It's an honor to present to you. So what was your title again at Southwest Regional Hospital?
I'm the director of purchasing, so let's hear more about what you've got.
Sure. So my company aims to revolutionize your fluorescent ballast. So this is what you guys actually have right now. This is what my technology can do for you. This is a new solid-state technology. It actually takes in 25 volts, uses about 500 milliamps of current, and only takes up 12.5 watts.
What's a ballast?
Well, let me explain. So, this is a fluorescent ballast. It looks like this. It basically limits the current going through your gas discharge lamp that's filled with mercury vapor and uses electricity to excite it.
Okay, how do I use this system?
Okay, not a problem. So, our system, which is again solid-state lighting, takes about plus minus 25 volts, which of course has to come from AC to DC regulator, which is going to be connected to a PC with a mouse that you can actually use to control the switching speed of your light-emitting diode and your brightness.
That sounds really complicated and expensive. How does it save me money?
Sure. Well, okay. So your lamp uses 60 watts. Mine uses 12.5.
Oh, you're selling energy-efficient light bulbs.
Okay, so who wants to start? Harvey, would you like to have the first kick? So what do you think went wrong from the beginning of that presentation that Charles was making?
Of course, everything went wrong. But of course, what went wrong was what happened before he actually walked in through the door. because what he wasn't was he wasn't prepared. He wasn't prepared in a whole variety of ways. Firstly, he hadn't got, at least as Chris had mentioned before, some sort of generic presentation. But he hadn't got something even more important in that generic presentation. He hadn't got something that was going to catch and hold the attention of the recipient, the director of purchasing, until frankly far too late. She happened to be interested because he was giving her such wonderful facts, but she could have just as easily have stopped, just turned her interest off almost immediately. And of course, he didn't know she was the director of purchasing. Another little piece of homework that hadn't been done. So what this all points to is, or the first two things that it points to is you've got to do your homework. And another really key element of the homework was, what did he want to get out of the meeting? Where did he want the meeting to end up? I remember one of the very earliest lessons that I was taught by my boss, I don't want to tell you how many years ago, but he said, before you go into any sales call, know what you want to come out of that sales call. In other words, and write it down, so that before you have finished, you've actually written down the things that you want to see happen, and therefore you know if you haven't covered them off, so that you make sure that before you leave, you do cover them off. So everything depends upon preparation. And so here was an example of something where if he'd only got the preparation right, he got the presentation right, he knew what he wanted to get out of the meeting, he knew who was who in the organization and what their role was, the meeting could have been shorter, another very important thing, and it would have actually achieved something, whereas in this particular case, we don't know whether he achieved anything.
So he asked the wrong question to start it off. He asked who she was instead of, or what she did, instead of what her needs were. So if you go back to Krista's slide on the board, is using 2 ears and 1 mouth. He didn't follow the first rule, which is do a lot of questioning, not a lot of talking. And when he started the questioning, you know, a light bulb. You could probably think that a light bulb could be bought for someone because it shines a better light, or costs less to run, or is more convenient because you don't have to change it as often because it doesn't burn out, or it's part of the green movement or something like that. So his job in this call, in the first part of it, is to figure out what sort of needs the customer has. It's not talking to the customer, it's listening to the customer, it's asking a series of questions to elicit a priority of needs to figure out what is most important, because then, if he's doing his job well, he'll be able to take all those needs and recraft his sales speech to meet the needs of the customer specifically. So once again, it's all, and we see this in the Investment Accelerator Fund all the time. This is techno speak. People come in talking technology instead of talking benefits, instead of understanding needs as the first step.
So one of the other things that for me kind of jumped out, right away when Seema said that she was the director of purchasing, and Charles just continued to go on with a technical explanation. If he had done his homework right and he had known who it was and what he was doing, do you think he would have prepared differently and not spoken in technical terms? Because there's very different people, right, in an organization, and there's probably somebody in the organization who would have understood what he was talking about.
Absolutely, and in fact, of course, he should have been talking in terms of her language, which is the point that
Right.
you made during your presentation, and that, of course, was reiterated during this little exercise. He wasn't talking in her language, he was talking in, as Charles said, in techno-speak language. And so he was already going to fail almost before he started. In fact, we believe he might even be lucky. He may get through this part of the first exercise and get on to a second stage.
That's why it was a sketch. So maybe I'm going to move us to the second sketch.
So, thank you, Seema, for meeting with me again. I mean, since our last meeting, we've done everything that we've agreed on. I think everything has been great. I've talked to the emergency department. They've actually did the trials. The results are in, and we're saving you guys $1,400 a month. Not only that, I talked to the suppliers and your purchasing department, and they are like, we have to get you on the accredited supplier list. So I'm actually an accredited supplier. I think everything's all set, and let's get ready to go.
Okay, that's great, but I'm thinking for next steps that we probably want to do a couple more tests in a couple of the other departments. I'd like to see what the energy savings are for departments with low and medium usage of lighting, just to see what the real savings will be.
So if that's your next steps, I mean, first of all, I have the numbers right here. We can do a theoretical calculation. I can do the ROI for you right now. If you just give me the lighting parameters, everything can be done, so we can go ahead and proceed.
And the maintenance employees using the products need more time to be trained on the use and installation of the product.
I mean, it's a light bulb. What type of training do you need?
I'm gonna need all department heads as well as the maintenance head to approve the product before, and that means they have to have all tested and seen the results themselves.
I mean, if you had told me this earlier, we could have done the trials in parallel,
Oh,
and
don't
then...
worry about it. I mean, I can only introduce new products to maintenance on an annual basis anyway, so not to worry, we have plenty of time to do this. I don't need to make a decision till fourth quarter to meet that timeline.
I wish I hadn't included this revenue in the forecast. I mean, I've been at this for a year now, and new requirements keep popping up.
So this maybe, Charles, will start with you this time. One of the questions out of this is how do you deal with clients when you just have the unending list of next steps popping up?
Well, you know, when you're starting with a client, you've got to figure out what their needs are. And it's not just the needs for product, it's their needs for process. What are they doing? How do they go through the process? How do they budget? Who is required to be involved in the approval process? So Krista's slide of all those different people is really quite amazing. And my best example, I sold to Bell and Rogers and most of the telcos in Canada and throughout the world. And there is no risk too small to avoid in the telco business. So anything you're trying to sell to a telco is going to take you 18 months as a minimum. And then went in selling to a completely other type of industry, it's more the media type of industry, and found that they could make a decision within a month. And I almost went down that stupid path of, okay, here's what we're going to do, who's going to do, except that somebody reminded me to ask the question of what their buying process was. And as a result, we were able to get a trial in there in record speed, just because we asked the question. And understanding their needs, not just from product, but their needs from process, allow you to tailor what you're doing to what their needs are.
So, Harvey, how would you avoid having to do too much to earn a sale?
Well, I think that the first thing that you've actually got to do is to actually take it in steps anyway. I think one of the elements of this whole thing is if you're a small organization and a startup, there's only so much that you're going to be able to handle. And so what you want to do is remembering the point that Krista made in her presentation. She talked about the importance early on of getting references. In this particular case, what Charles wanted to do was really to get a reference sale and try to make sure that he avoided, frankly, all of the other situations that could occur. So the first thing that he should have done would be to have established with either her or with somebody else outside that part of the organization a relationship. Remember the word that Krista put up during her presentation and talked about coaches. Get a coach into the organization, somebody to tell him what's going on, and establish a limitation on that first deal so that in fact he can prove himself, he can actually sell it as a benefit. It's actually one of the very important things that you need to do, because Charles quoted one thing. He actually did one good thing, which was he quoted a number. He actually said, you're going to make a saving of $1,400. But that was just one element, an important element of the benefits that he was talking about. But there are lots of soft benefits as well. He's not talked about the ease of installation, the ease of maintenance, and he's not also talked about things which are important from his point of view, but which he can put in from the client's point of view, which is really to try and get a small sale initially, to establish a reference within that organization from which to grow his business. Because this is not a sale of a certain number of light bulbs. This is a long-term relationship that you're attempting to build with the organization. And therefore you should recognize that it is a long-term relationship where the client needs to be happy at every stage along the line. And that's another final thing about this particular call. One of the things that, again, I learned very early on was that every single call in an enterprise sale matters. You can't have a bad call because you're competing with other people. And if you're competing with other people and you have a bad call, the chances are that they didn't have the bad call. You didn't get the business and you never knew why.
So Charles, a quick question just to end this one is, what type of clients tend to have long analysis phase? Is it a type or is it an individual client? Is there a way to figure that out?
You know, it's funny, in any one industry, you get a whole bunch of different varieties. Best example is Aerospadatos, who you might remember from the world of Bell Mobility and TELUS and things like that. And of course, if he's listening to this by the odd chance, he's an absolute terror in the world of sales because he wanted immediate answers from people. He wanted an immediate turnaround. He had a very innovative agenda and responded very quickly, but worked in Bell, which is a very slow company. So even within Bell, you had very short selling cycles and very long selling cycles at the same time, depending upon the nature of the individual. So you know, you can go back to the diffusion of innovation and how you look at innovators and how they buy compared to how followers buy and people along the curve. You got to figure out what you're dealing with to figure out how they're going to buy to affect your selling.
Great. So maybe then final skit.
So this looks like a great product. It performed better than expected at all the trials. All the department heads are excited about getting started. Budget's approved. We're ready to go.
Great. But I was actually also talking to the head of IT, and we were brainstorming about all these revolutionary new applications. I mean, we can get rid of your radio frequency and then replace with optical wireless and increase your...
That's great, but we should really get this project underway.
Yeah, but being a startup, I have limited resources, and if this is a great opportunity for you, I'm gonna need just a little bit more time to make it work.
I need you to work within my project requirements and timeline.
Yeah, but this is such a big opportunity for you and me. I mean, if we actually get this thing working, you're gonna be superstars in your organization. IT's gonna be...
we were already set, though. I have a deliverable. I don't really have time for all of that.
Well, I mean, I already also talked to the head of IT anyway, and it seems like they're planning to just go ahead and roll your project onto their milestones.
Oh. I see. Okay. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go with another vendor on this one. I can't jeopardize my project because of IT's timelines.
So this skit is touching on a whole other skill, which is how to close. And this was not an example of how to close. This is more an example of how to lose a close. So, Harvey, maybe what went wrong in that conversation? What did Charles do wrong?
Well, apart from the fact that he didn't really attempt to close properly at all, one thing that he did do, and which is possibly one of the worst things you can do, is don't generate interest you cannot satisfy. And that's really, really important from a startup's point of view. There's only Charles. He's only got a certain amount of resource. He better not go to too many prospects. We've seen how you need to allocate time, and I'll touch about time in a moment. So the important thing was that he really needed to actually focus on that first deal with the organization and actually make sure that that one happened. And make sure it happened, he could have made sure it happened in a whole variety of different ways. And we might be able to talk about this a little later. But let's come back to this point about time, which I mentioned. You remember the funnel that was put up at the beginning? Very, very important element of the funnel is that there are lots of different things that are happening along the line within the funnel. And how a salesperson allocates their time to the different stages will actually tell you at the end of the day how much business they're going to close. And Krista mentioned before that I've had the opportunity of working in a number of organizations. One in particular, which was an organization called Dell, which had a large sales organization which dealt with all three levels of business, the consumer level, the small, medium enterprise, and the large enterprise business. With each of those salespeople, we watched how they allocated their time. And I frankly could tell from online information quite a long time ago, just how much business any person was going to close by how they were allocating their time and whether they in fact were going to achieve their targets because of it. In this particular case, Charles could have, either at an earlier meeting or potentially at this meeting, he could have used a trial close. He could have used a range of alternatives to enable him to close by giving the client some alternatives, but all of those were his alternatives. He could have used a variety of, he could have presented things which essentially made his product unique, so the opportunity to go to the alternative vendor was not there because the director of purchasing had been convinced that there was something within his product that made it important that whatever else was happening, she purchased from him because his product was actually meeting her particular requirement. In other words, he had converted one of his USPs, unique selling propositions, into a requirement that he had obtained from her at one of the earlier meetings.
So in this example, obviously he totally missed the cue that the deal was closed and reopened it in this skit. But there are other situations where you do so much work. How do you know, Charles, that you've earned the right to close the deal if you turn that stage around?
Well, first rule, I know this comes from Gary McRoss or whatever, is that always be closing, ABC of sales. So the idea of always be closing is you should always be closing something. So you're not trying to take someone through a ridiculously long process and at the very end close something. Close all sorts of things in little wee steps along the way. So when you say earn the right to close, it means that you've asked the right questions that are such as, if we can agree on this, does that make sense to you? It's a very casual way of getting an advance close on something, or can we agree to a next meeting? Or can we agree that I'll give you a proposal? Now, using the words can we agree is a very early rudimentary sales process. There are more effective ways of saying it, very casual ways. You can always tell a new salesperson, because they're using these strange words by rote, that if you agree that such and such, and it's always entertaining, but and always be closing, find a small thing that you can close every time you meet, leading to an assumptive close at the end, or a presumptive close, which is something that you know that they've agreed to everything along the way. So then when you actually close, there are no closing words used. It's more like, well, we've presented this far. When would you like to place your order? You're presuming that the close will occur because you've earned the right to close by having so many closes along the way.
Any other comments?
I'm just going to add one small point. But of course, we've just shown one little example of one particular situation here. But don't forget, in many organizations, particularly if it's a large solution and you have a large solution that you're trying to sell, the decision making isn't as simple as ultimately having got either asking for the order or having it been agreed that you're going to get the order. What's actually happening is that they're going to go away once everybody has presented to them, presented on a number of occasions, and they, the organization, those various purchasers, various different types of purchasers within the organization, are going to go away and make the decision. But that doesn't mean to say that you have got to stop selling during that period of time. And how you use that period of time when they're off, supposedly not talking to anybody, how you can actually monopolize their decision-making time in the most effective manner possible can actually make the difference between whether you actually get the business or not, despite everything that has gone before. Krista touched during her presentation on that little phrase, nobody ever lost their job by buying from IBM. What IBM was particularly strong at was the process between everybody having finished their presentations and having finished the discussions with the client and the client making the decision. They handled that period where supposedly nothing was happening more effectively and more aggressively than probably at almost any other point in time in the sale. The result was they tended to pick up most of the business because other people had thought that everybody was now going into that little huddle period when nothing was going to happen. Not for IBM. The business, they stopped selling effectively at the point in time that they took the order and the ink was drying on the contract.
So maybe what we'll do now is open it up to questions from the audience. Thank you, Charles and Seema. I think I think it's important for me to reiterate that, we covered such a small piece of enterprise sales that I'm hoping that there's some questions or that we can cover a little bit more for you. I do encourage everybody to really think about this and to think about the professional requirements if you're going into B2B sales.
Hi. I just wanted to find out a little bit more, I guess, some of the differences when you're selling a service versus selling a product. I know your presentation touched on different subject matter, but from the panel, some, I guess, common tips, experience from selling services.
The great thing about selling services is you can invent the solution as you're going through the sales call. And so it's a much more flexible process. It's a lot more complex as well at the same time. And it's a lot more built into understanding the needs of the client. Because unfortunately, if you're selling a box or a commodity product, there's only so many things that it can do and so far you can go. So you can't be as creative, except for the line, don't confuse sell with install, which is frequently used in the computer industry. The idea of selling a service is really much more interactive and letting the customer define the service, thereby define the product as you go along.
And I would reiterate what Charles said. In other words, the client's very often going to define the requirement when it's a service because it's more open-ended. But notwithstanding that, of course, when you're selling a solution, it's a combination of the two. And so many things don't change. You've just got to make sure that you can actually represent what you have to offer in the terms that the client is really looking for, and you can make what you're offering something different from that which most other people are going to be able to offer. And as Charles said, if you're nimble about it, you can actually come up with solutions that really do look unique from the client's point of view in terms of your offering.
And I think one of the important differences as well is that if you're selling a service, you really have to demonstrate capability to manage that service over time. Whereas if you're selling a product, you have to make sure that you can get them the product at a specific moment in time. So it's a much different relationship that you're establishing with the company because it's a recurring relationship that you're going to need to have on a monthly basis, depending on how you're billing them. So I think that it does go into the needs to have much more of your operational stuff as fundamentally designed ahead of time.
Hi, there was a line in the pie graph that you had, the pie chart,
Yep.
in the sales section about finding pain. Is this identifying needs within your target client?
Yes. So it's about finding, one of the things, especially with entrepreneurial ventures, is that you're often, you're selling something that maybe is an unidentified need. So it's going to be really important to try to find a pain point that is something that they're experiencing in their business today. Because if you're trying to convince them that what your product is solving a problem that, yeah, it might be a problem, but it might not be a pain point yet. It might just be a slight little cut. And it just hasn't reached the awareness level, you're going to have a hard time getting their attention. So it is really important to be able to match your value proposition. And that helps in the targeting inside a segment to find out which companies you really want to go to. Do you guys want to attempt that?
Well, the one thing I would add to it also is that it's a great opportunity when you have something that's very new, and if you can present it in the client's terms, remembering they're not necessarily going to come out and ask for a solution in that area. It's a very great opportunity to create or to help somebody develop their career within the organization. Because if they can show that they are actually selling something that is essentially new, and they're bringing something new to the organization as a solution to a problem that does exist within the organization, they're going to help their career. And don't forget, when you're selling, particularly to large organizations, you're not necessarily selling just a solution or just a product. You're also selling the development of somebody's career. That's why Krista, during her presentation, made the point that it's that much more difficult for small organizations and startup organizations to sell into large organizations than existing large organizations.
As a sidebar to that, if the client that you're targeting doesn't realize yet that's going to hurt a hell of a lot if you leave it, how do you develop that client to say, you need to look at this? We've got a better way for you to handle it, and if you don't, it's just going to fester, using your analogy there.
If I can just answer that one. You've used some wrong expressions in the way you presented it, if you don't mind my saying, because you presented about what we had. What you've actually got to be trying to talk about is what the client has. And you've got to actually discuss it. Remember, sales is a set of conversations. You've got to discuss it until you actually start to get to the point, as Charles indicated before, that there's agreement that there is an issue here within the organization from their point of view. And now they'll start to latch onto that very strongly.
And my advice is leave that client, go find another one. Keep in touch with that first client and come back when the client realizes Because trying to get a client to understand that they have a need before they really have the need is really time consuming. You can spend hours just dealing with that. Find someone who already has the need much faster.
You talked about the challenges of going after the small to medium-sized business space. Could you just expand on maybe some techniques, some strategies? I know this is an enterprise talk, but could be really helpful.
Well, so SMBs are considered in the enterprise as well. A lot of the same techniques apply.
Yeah.
The key issue with SMBs is channel.
Sorry, that's why I meant like specifically.
Yeah, so when you look at the channel, what you really need to do is start to match yourself with channels that have an affinity towards what you're doing. So in this case, a lot of what we talked about in terms of positioning yourself with an enterprise and the segmentation and selecting the right ones, you need to turn that attention to selecting the right channel. So it's very similar in terms of a lot of the activities that you will undertake in terms of figuring out what that is.
So can you give some channel examples for the SMB space, like other than the border trade or what other?
So technology partners. Could you give me some help in terms of what's your product or
Sure,
in what area of the product, because that will help.
So let's say that you're addressing Salesforce for the SMB space, customizations, so services.
So like competing with Salesforce.com?
No, you're partnering with Salesforce. And
Okay.
you're reselling and packaging and customizing for the SMB.
In which case, you are the channel that
Yes,
Salesforce uses
your
to get to the customer.
Salesforce's channel, yeah.
Yeah.
So now the next question that arises in that situation, and I'll talk to you about it from the Dell position when they were selling into the SME market space. Remembering, of course, they were selling a product, but let me now talk about it. The issue here, and the reason that the word channel gets mentioned, is it's a question of cost. Effectively, it's the cost of sale. How can I afford, I've got to make a profit eventually. I'm going to be selling lots of these, but I've got to make a profit out of these sales. How much time can I actually afford effectively with each sale? And therefore, you've got to, if you are becoming the channel, you've now got to actually look at whether you can actually make a sale within the space of time that you're prepared to allow over possibly a series of phone calls. In the case that Dell actually operated, they hardly ever sent a direct salesperson out to an SME company in terms of closing the business. And so they actually followed Charles's advice in this particular case, which is if they couldn't see themselves closing it within a certain number of calls, they moved on to the next client.
And we get lots of people coming to us saying, I've got products for SME market. And when you look at the stats, there are 20 million businesses in the United States, let's say. 85% of them are below $5 million in revenue, 15% or more. So when you look at the numbers of companies, you're talking about 1.7 million or 17 million, and you say, oh, that's an enormous market, But I just tell people, don't bother. You're going to have extended sales cycles. You've got a real large investment in channel marketing. It's much easier to develop a product for the 15% of the companies, because the other side is that 15% of companies results in 85% of the revenue of the companies. So that while they are small in number, they're big in purchasing. And if you look at the top 50 in the Fortune 500 and the top 50 in the Inc., of the top 50 in Fortune 500, 95% are there because they sell to corporations. Large corporations, not small ones. If you look at the Inc. List, it's about 70% that are there because they're selling to large corporations, not small corporations. So I'd question your business first and then proceed with caution.
Right. Thanks. Did you want to continue? Or?
No, that's okay.
From the skills point of view, instead of the process for a second, what are a few things that we can incorporate, a few tips maybe, to encourage the client to be a little more decisive, action-taking on the one side, and maybe to create rapport on the other side? I mean,
That's a broad one.
For an example, there is the whole mirroring thing, if they're looking like that, do the same thing, to create rapport along those lines.
Well, people buy from people they like.
Right, so you need
Okay?
rapport.
Simple thing, and which is why I said alcohol is the solution to that problem.
Maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah, so you have to establish a casual rapport, an easygoing, non-pressure-based relationship with an individual that doesn't like making decisions.
But it's always interesting to, sorry to interrupt, it's always interesting to try to balance the report with the close inside of, okay, let's make a decision, even if it's a small one.
But if you're always making little closes, then it's something they get used to, and it's just natural. It never comes down to this big, enormous close meeting, because you've closed them all along the way, little bit by little bit.
And if you have a good rapport with the person, and they know you're there, like everybody in business knows when they're being sold to. And so that's one of a lot of us have that kind of, I don't like to ask for anything sort of attitude, but when you're in a sales role and you're selling and you're creating a relationship, the person on the other side knows what you're doing, and they're waiting for you to close it. So it's one of those things that it's more of a personal thing that we need to get over. You know, if you're making those little next stages, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do there? And you don't let it get too personal so that you're in that awkward stage. Like, I think that's what's really important, is to remember that when you're there and you're doing it, they know what you're doing. They know that you're selling. They're waiting for you to ask them. And if they like you and if you've met all their hurdles and stuff like that, that it's going to go through. And so that's what I think is really important. And I think you said that to me about not just having to get over and not being afraid to ask. It's like, know you've done everything, be comfortable in your product, be confident in what you're doing, and say, hey, I think we're there now. And if you've developed that rapport, then the guy's either going to go, yes, good, or he's going to say, you know, no, I need you to do 2 more things. So that's, I think part of it is just getting over your own sort of comfort zone in terms of just asking for the close.
You must understand their buying process. We've talked, and you've got to ask them about it. And don't forget, typically the person on the other side, and I don't want to use the sort of the wall description for a moment, but the purchaser, they also don't have the time to waste.
Right.
Now, you may get the odd company in which the person happens to, but typically they're pretty busy. Most people are pretty busy people. And so they're not going to want to have too many conversations that aren't going to lead to somewhere. You understand the process, you understand the use of their time, and you'll find that you can ask for the difficult questions, and you can also ask for the order. And don't be scared to ask for it. Have confidence in what you have to offer.
Right.
Okay, thank you. What are some ways to shorten sales cycle?
Trials.
Yeah, exactly.
Free trials. Always try and get, and you mentioned splitting the sale down into multiple parts. The sales process, you've succeeded if you can get a trial in, and you can figure out shorter free trials, elongated paid trials. That's the way to get people. You have to reduce their reluctance to buy. You know, cut down the barriers, and that's the easiest way.
Another question, quick question actually, in addition to that. In our business, we're in medical imaging software. We sell to private diagnostic clinics, and what happens is that we get the clinics going through all the process, demos, quoting, and everything, and they're all excited, and they're almost ready to sign, and then they disappear for a period of 6 months to 12 months, and then they reappear again, and they say, okay, let's take it. How do we get rid of that 6 to 12 months, or what do we do there? Or maybe we're not doing something right.
The answer is maybe you aren't, I'm afraid, because if you've got somebody to the point at which they're going to make a purchase and you've understood their decision-making process, then you have every right to ask for the order. And if you're finding that every time that you are getting to a point and people are then walking away, you're not understanding their process and you're not agreeing with them, their process. So, tough thing to say is you're not doing it from your point of view. You've got to be prepared to ask for the decision. Frankly, you're better off than not doing so, because otherwise all you're doing is wasting your time on lost sales.
And what it sounds like there is that it isn't included in that year's budget, and they've got to wait for another budgetary cycle to put it in if it's a capital item.
By the way, one of the ways of shortening a cycle is if you are dealing with government, very much there are points in time at certain periods in the year when they have budgets to use.
Okay, thanks. Hi. Now, if you are a company with either a good product or a good service, and you do realize that you do not have a good sales team or a good sales manager, now the obvious thing would be to either hire a good sales manager or make a good sales team. But does outsourcing sales to another company, does that make good sense? Are there any successful companies which have, successfully outsourced their sales to companies which specifically do sales?
So you're talking about outsourcing the sales function or using a channel? Because that's what a channel is outsourcing your sales.
A channel, pretty much everyone uses it, but outsourcing the whole function of sales.
I'm going to let one of you, I have a personal opinion on that.
I mean, that's like appointing an agent, which
Yeah.
to me is just like another person in the channel, and the agent has no particular commitment or investment required. So it's just a low down place. So I sense that you're a little hesitant about your capabilities to sell. Anyone can learn to sell. If you can learn to ask questions and think of the end user and the end user's needs all the time above all else, you can learn to sell very quickly. It's more of a mind shift than anything else. These aren't complex techniques, which is why selling, when you're, how many people here went to school and you wonder how those dumb people always ended up making so much money? Sales is half brains, double money. Okay? That's one of those professions. So you don't have to be all that bright. In fact, it might get in the way sometimes.
Right, but I understand what you're saying, but like companies, they outsource the function of, let's say, manufacturing to other manufacturers who could do it better, or accountancy, who do it better. But I don't know if companies could outsource the function of sales completely and focus on product development or service delivery, because that's what they're really good at. Is there an example that you may have in mind?
Yeah, there are examples of organizations that you can go to who will in fact take over the sales function for you, or parts of the sales function, and they may well do it at the early stages with your product. And it's not the most desirous way to approach the situation, but it can be made to work. But at the end of the day, if you have a product that requires direct sales, you need to be able to have your own direct sales organization. If it's a product that's going to benefit from channel, then frankly, the best thing you can do is to find your channels. If at the beginning you're in the process of doing what Charles says, which is learning how to sell directly, yes, there are people that you can go to who will in fact take it on, and they'll take it on for a very substantial commission. But it may be something you need to do.
Right, thank you.
In your experience, do you find sales easier based on price or feature?
Depends.
Well, the easy answer for that is always price, because everybody likes a deal. The most important thing is you should never, if you're competing on price, you're in trouble, because price is the easiest thing for somebody to compete against you on. So it's not, I don't see feature and price as black and white, as two separate items that you kind of choose between. It's the whole point to what we've been trying to say about enterprise-based sales, very, very different than consumer-based sales, by the way, where you're in some very price-sensitive markets, is that, it's all about creating value. So if you can take your features and your price that you need to sell it at and put it into a value proposition that is something that somebody's willing to pay for, you're going to be successful. But if you're just going out there and you're like for like on feature and you're competing on price, you're going to be in trouble, because you're in a commodity market, the margins are low, and that's going to be a very difficult business to continue to go and make it successful.
Add one more word there: feature, price, benefit. It's easiest to sell on benefits,
Yeah, exactly.
not on features or prices. And when we were selling it to the telcos, we would go in and tell the telcos that our price is twice as much as our nearest competitor. They will pay way more from us than they will ever pay from anyone else. And the reason they will do that is because our systems will never go down. They will never have a minute of outage in a whole year from one of our systems, and we'll sign agreements to give them money back if it does. And because of that, we were able to pay, because the benefit to them was in the telco world going down as a sin.
You are referring to quality pretty much, I guess.
Sorry.
Pardon me?
Sorry.
Yeah, I guess you are referring to quality.
No, it's a benefit, not a feature.
Remember what I said, that the chart was value proposition is everything? Value proposition in the eye of the consumer, the client, the person that you're selling to, is everything. So if the only value proposition that you have is price, you're a commodity. It's not. I'm hoping you're using online or really, really inexpensive sales, because you're very quickly going to go down into a low margin business.
Be creative. I mean, you can really be very, very creative about almost any of the features and benefits and the value proposition associated with them that you sell. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was involved with an organization where virtually everybody had a solution in that market sector. And so how did we differentiate ourselves? We differentiated ourselves by the design of the key on the keyboard. And I could actually sit next to somebody and give them a half-an-hour presentation on why that key was going to make life that much better and more efficient for their organization. So you can be creative about it as well.
So maybe last 2 questions, because I know one of our panelists does have to go.
Thank you.
In your slides, you indicated one of the skills of an effective salesperson was getting at the budget. How do you avoid that chicken and egg conversation of how much does it cost? Well, what's your budget?
You can't avoid that conversation. You have to have it. And so but the thing that you need to do in that is you need to say, this is what a typical install costs, and you need to get away from, remember what I was talking about, custom proposals and when you make it just for them. So you can't avoid that. You have to have that conversation, because number one, you have to figure out if it's even in the ballpark. So it's one of the ones that at some point, and since you want the sale more than they probably want to buy in a lot of cases, if you have the opposite scenario, they're pretty quickly telling you what it is, right? I don't know if you guys have any other specific advice to me other than you just have to have the conversation.
I agree. I think you have to have it. I think at the end of the day, obviously, price is going to be a factor. There are very few situations in which price doesn't appear on the eventual final checklist of decision making. And that's when a coach becomes extremely useful.
Exactly.
Customer has to trust you before they'll tell you how much they have to spend. So you got to become their friend, get their trust, or get them drunk.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the win-win situation that you're setting up. And I believe the benefit gets you in the door, but then when you're actually talking with the person, there's that whole sort of ego and developing the relationship with the person. And I think you need to develop a win for that person. And we sort of mentioned, like, one of them is this sale can like benefit your career. Another thing that I find very effective is if you actually go to that person's boss and just mention how efficient the system is and how great this person is in buying my system. Do you have any other sort of pearls of wisdom that talk about wins for the individual person?
Sure that I can think of. I think that I touched on before the issue of career, and I think that it's important. But there's also the win for the whole organisation, and you should never forget that you are actually, at the end of the day. If you remember, I said before, have confidence in your product. The more that you exude confidence in your product with every meeting, the more that will be felt by everybody, all of the clients, personnel at those meetings, and will be carried through. So I think it's extremely important to make sure that people go away with the absolute knowledge that this is something that you are going to be confident about being able to install successfully and effectively, and they really don't have too many worries about it. And then obviously there are the other benefits of it. It's a new product, and it's something which is going to give us some edge in the marketplace. So think about everything that your product could do to improve them and their business, and make sure that those come through in your conversations with them.
A couple of little things is offer them speaking opportunities if you know that that's something that they're interested in, and you have, and because a lot of people, they like to do that from a networking perspective, especially some of the real technical buyers in terms of what they're trying to do. So it's really about getting to know the person you're selling to and who has the final say and what makes them tick. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That was hopefully helpful.